the needs of victims? What does the insurance look like? These very important issues. But then we're reducing victims to passive actors, to someone to be helped, another number in the queue. So I think we not only have to depoliticize, we have to de-bureaucratize our mindset on this. To the contrary, we have to humanize. And here, the two very powerful things can happen. If we allow victims into the discussion, we not only hear their voices and get better advice on what they need, so we can meet very real human needs. It also, as you said, Mr. Chairman, puts a human face on the issue. There's nothing more needed, quite frankly, in the fight against terrorism than for us to have and to create a global movement that refuses to accept terrorism as a legitimate instrument. And that is something that no one has a more powerful voice on than victims. They certainly have a more powerful voice than me as a chairman of the Counterterrorism Implementation Task Force, and I dare say even more so than my boss, the Secretary General. When victims speak on this issue, people do listen because they have to listen. It's a human to human connection which is going to create that movement, and that's something we can't manufacture in the halls of the UN, but we can import it.
Thank you very much. I don't know whether you can take perhaps one or two questions or you have to leave. We're going to release you from here. Thanking you again for your presence here this afternoon, and we will continue. Thanks again. So let me now start making a brief introduction of the rest of the panelists who are here with us this afternoon, starting by Mr. Szymonovich. Ivan Szymonovich is Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights. He's heading the OHCHR's New York office. Before joining the United Nations from 2008, he held the position of Minister for Justice of Croatia. Previously, Mr. Szymonovich was Deputy Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Permanent Representative to the United Nations in New York, where he served as Senior Vice President and President of the Economic and Social Council from 2001 to 2003. Thank you very much for being here. Via video conference linked with London, it's my pleasure to say good evening to you, Mr. Ben Emmerson. Mr. Emmerson is the Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms while countering terrorism. He took up his functions on the 1st of August 2011. As a practicing barrister in London, he has more than 25 years of experience in domestic and international human rights law, international humanitarian law, and international criminal law. Mr. Emmerson has litigated extensively in domestic courts, the European Court of Human Rights, the International Court of Justice, and the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, including on domestic and international terrorism cases. Spain, if I may say so, welcomes the leadership of Mr. Emmerson in his new capacity as Special Rapporteur, and is very happy to collaborate with him in his duty. Ms. Marta Requena is here to my left. She is now active at the Terrorism Prevention Branch, and she's the chief of this branch at the UNODC. Before, she was active as head of the Public International Law and Anti-Terrorism Division of the Council of Europe, where she has had long experience in these issues. Thank you to be here with us. Ms. Carrie Limack. I don't know whether this is correct.
It's close. It's good.
It goes. At least it goes. Thanks. She is co-founder of Global Survivors Network, a global organization for victims of terror, to speak out against terrorism and radicalization. Since launching GSN in November 2009, she has coordinated and inspired events in Jordan, Pakistan, and Indonesia, produced an award-winning documentary film called or entitled Killing in the Name, and spearheaded a website and generated interest and coverage in media outlets worldwide. Thank you for being here with us this afternoon, and of course your experience and your witnesses of the utmost important for our discussions this afternoon. And finally, last but not least, on my right side, Ms. Maite Pazartundúa. She is the president of the Foundation Victims of Terrorism in Spain. She is a lecturer, an analyst, and author of articles and essays on terrorism. And she is also a victim of terrorism since her brother, Joseba Pazartundúa, was murdered by the terrorist organization ETA on the 8th of February of 2003 while he was having a coffee at the bar in his hometown. As his executioner was seated in front of another coffee, very close to him. Thank you very much for being here to share with the audience your analysis on victims and on terrorism as a whole. Well, this concludes my already too long perhaps presentation, but we have extraordinary panelists, eminent panelists with us this afternoon, so we are really happy to and looking forward to the discussion. I would like to give the floor in the order of the presentations, then first of all to Mr. Szymanowicz.
Thank you very much. I'm grateful to the Permanent Mission of Spain, to Instituto Cervantes, and to Counter-Terrorism Implementation Task Force for organizing this event. I think that the topic, the rights of victims of terrorism, is highly important and is very closely related to what I'm doing. Besides being Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights, I'm also chairing a group on protection of human rights while countering terrorism. And just as Bob Orr has shared a couple of minutes ago, Secretary General has organized a symposium on supporting victims of terrorism in 2008. And it was a watershed of the United Nations' more concerted approach to victims of terrorism as the important agents of fight against terrorism. Following up Secretary General's initiative, Office of High Commissioner organized in June last year a panel discussion on the human rights of victims of terrorism. So we have gathered a number of states sharing their very practical experiences, how they formulated their laws, what are the policies and practices that ensure that the rights of victims of terrorism are adequately protected. And it would take us long to share all the moving experiences that were shared at the time, but I would like to identify a couple of highlights of the discussion which serve as sort of recommendations how to approach to the fight against terrorism from the victim's perspective and acknowledging the victim's rights. First, it's important to establish rights of victims of terrorism in the international human rights law. And I'm saying that because that makes not only a gesture of generosity on behalf of governments to take their interests into account, but it's transformed into their legal obligation. Second, the dignity of victims should always be fully regarded. And it's a quite a span of measures, and they are different immediately in the immediate aftermath of terrorist attacks, how to deal with traumas, physical and the emotional traumas of victims. However, what is found to be crucial is that the victims should not be forgotten when the spotlight of media has found something else interesting. There is a continuous need to care about victims. There are various ways how to help to victims, survivors and their families to deal with the legacy of their trauma. It certainly requires the possibility to find out the truth of developments of perpetrators. It is important for them to get the full disclosed information. Who was behind the terrorist plot, who were perpetrators, who were the ones who were ideologically inspiring the actions. Victims are entitled to get information on judicial proceedings, to be included in judicial proceedings, to share their knowledge, which is important in sense of providing additional information on the act itself, but it's also psychologically important because it is a sort of a relief for them to share with the judicial process their experience. They have to be provided with the access to the justice system. Some victims are in a situation that requires free legal aid for them to be able to access the justice system because they cannot afford expenses themselves. The legal proceedings have to be swift. The protraction of legal proceedings is an additional torture to victims and to their families. What is also important is that victims feel solidarity, that they feel solidarity, national solidarity and international solidarity. And a lot of nice and good practices we have seen from a number of countries ensuring respect for their human rights, having special days devoted to victims of terrorism, special events. What is also identified as highly important? It is to avoid that minority groups are targeted and that they are perceived as all of them being involved in terrorist attacks. The fact that some perpetrators belong to certain minority groups does not make the whole group responsible. As it is important for those respective minority groups to send a clear message that they dissociate from terrorist acts, it is also important for the majorities to say that they are not profiling minorities and they are not discriminating against them in spite of the involvement of some members of minorities in the terrorist acts. And finally, of course, last but not least, it is highly important for victims to know that states are improving their mechanisms to prevent terrorism and to prevent future victimization. So, let me close with making it quite clear that the mechanisms, legal mechanisms, as well as good practices, have been identified and have been shared by states, and therefore there is no excuse not to stand to our commitments. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Šimanović, for this interesting presentation. I know that you have also to leave some time, not very late, but let's continue with some other presentations, and then before you leave, we could perhaps try to open the floor for perhaps for some questions come regarding your presentation. So it's now again, I reiterate my pleasure to give the floor, in this case, to Mr. Emerson from London. I hope that you are following correctly without problems this broadcast. We think that things are functioning correctly, and without further comments, I give you the floor. The floor is yours.
Gracias, Senor Sanabria. It is my pleasure to participate in this important event. I want to start, if I may, by thanking the permanent mission of Spain for continuing to highlight this central issue, to thank the Counter-Terrorism Implementation Task Force, the Nueva del Terrorismo, and the Fundación Miguel Ángel Blanco for their kind invitation to be with you, albeit remotely. Since taking up my functions as Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of human rights while countering terrorism, I have sought to stress my view that the human rights of the victims of terrorism and the corresponding obligations that lie on states in international law terms lie at the heart of any meaningful effort to combat terrorism. I've also come to the conclusion, like others who